My grandparents were much loved by me, and I enjoyed being their company. But there was just one little problem. I didn't like going over to their place. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't them or even their house. It was the spot of land that had been cleared for a new home behind their backyard that I did not like. As strange as this may sound, it screamed so much danger. My stomach would drop whenever I stared at it. I couldn't figure out where the feeling was coming from. There was nothing out there to be scared of, just dirt and a few trees. It was so bad you couldn't get me to go into their backyard for nothing. The only time any feeling ever came close as a comparison was when my family went to the Grand Canyon. As I glanced over the edge, I imagined falling, and it was very scary. Kind of the same thing. Since Grandma did not like me playing in the front yard next to the road, on many visits I got stuck inside because of my refusal to venture into the back. Their frustration was evident when talking to me, trying to understand. Because I had zero ideas as to why I felt so much fear, I certainly couldn't explain it. Grandpa called me weird. Didn't care. My thinking was, as long as I stayed away from it, I was safe. As I got older, nothing changed my feelings about it. One beautiful summer day, my Uncle Gary, who was 20 at the time, was back from college on break and, along with his girlfriend and best friend, got talked into babysitting me for a couple of hours while Grandma did some errands. After she left, my uncle tells me to go into the backyard and play, knowing darn well I wouldn't go out there. I shout no. He goes on to inform his friends of my phobia about the empty spot of land. Feeling hurt and betrayed, I glared at him. They started teasing me and talking about a troll who lived in the woods beyond and ate little kids and such nonsense. I just ignored them. A few minutes later, Uncle Gary left the room and came back to throw a blanket over me and wrap me up like a mummy. I couldn't get out. I knew where they were taking me, into the backyard. I screamed and kicked, trying to get free, as a mixture of feelings overcame me of pure terror and fierce anger. They were laughing as I was carried away, not one of them listening to my pleas. Finally, I was set free and the blanket removed. The sunlight blinded me for a second before I was able to focus. I found myself standing at the fence that separated the backyard from the field. I was so tired of no one taking me seriously when I spoke of the danger. At that moment, something snapped inside me. The next thing I know, I start climbing over the fence. No matter how scared I felt, I was going to go out into the field to find out what it was that had me on red alert. Had one leg over the top rail, and that's when I saw it, coming from the edge of the woods and moving over the field towards my direction. It was a tidal wave, except this was sweeping over the land hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. The slow moving wave was huge. My grandparents lived on a 2-acre lot. My best guess, it was at least a half an acre in width and twice as tall as their single floor house. It passed through trees and boulders in its path, but didn't seem to be moving or damaging any of them. I looked behind me and asked the laughing trio, "Do they see it?" They just kept teasing me about being afraid of the troll. I swallowed the terror I was feeling and studied the wave as it got closer. It was completely black except for these little explosions of different colored lights inside of it, reminding me of a fireworks displays. Then the murmur started, low at first, but as it got closer and louder, I realized the sounds were moans and crying coming from men, women, and children. My fear level was through the roof. It felt too wrong. The last thing I remembered was putting my hand out to touch the edge of the wave as it reached me and felt an electrical shock through my whole body, along with a brilliance of white light. I wake up in the hospital groggy and try to move my legs, but one was too heavy. Looking down, I see the cast. What the hell happened to me? My grandparents seemed very relieved I was all right. Still being angry and in a lot of pain, I tell on my uncle and his friends, skipping the part about the tidal wave. They got blamed for letting me get hurt. I felt no guilt. After all, it was their fault. A couple of months went by, and my Uncle Gary and I had a heart-to-heart talk. He told me how they watched me put my arm out and said it was like I got hit by lightning that lifted me up in the air and threw me several feet back into the yard. It was how my leg got broken. It had still been wrapped around the fence when I was sent flying backwards. Scared the crap out of them when they realized I was hurt and unconscious. As they tried to wake me up, all of them heard the gut-wrenching screams, sounding like people being tortured coming from the direction of the field, but they never saw anyone. His friends made it quite clear they were not going back to his house, ever. Now he believes me. Something evil lives on that patch of land. Neither of us went into the backyard ever again. Years later, and all grown up, I live in another state and still wonder if a house was ever built on that lot. No doubt in my mind if there was, it is haunted, and not by the friendly kind of ghost, but by something more sinister, deeper, older. Every spring, my cousin and I, along with a few friends, would hike out into the woods and camp. You're miles from anyone. The perfect place to get away. Sitting around the fire, Brenda and Mitch come back from a bathroom break in the trees, saying there were other campers nearby. No way, I said, finding it hard to believe. I mean, the odds of us running into other campers was remote. Behind our tents was a dirt embankment, and we climbed it to see, and to my surprise, in the distance was what seemed to be a campfire. And not just one, but 7. At first we thought maybe a forest fire, but the fires didn't spread. A woman's blood-curdling scream ripped through the air, silencing us all. So shocked, we just stare at each other dumbfounded. Another scream, this time a man's, got me into action, and I run into my tent to grab my rifle, which I only carried for protection against bear and mountain cats. None of us slept that night, keeping close to the fire and watching the darkness beyond. The next morning, we hiked over to the direction of the campfires, but found no trace of any human activity. We came across trees that had been chopped down. You could still see some of the chop marks from an axe. Judging from the condition of the tree stumps, figured they had been cut down at least 100 years ago. As we check out the area, David comes back with what looks like some kind of brooch. After cleaning it, the center held a nickel-sized light blue stone, maybe turquoise. I could make out a little design details on the metal around the edges, as the metal was pretty deteriorated, had to be old. We knew people had been here, but it had been many years ago, not last night. The next evening, as soon as it got dark, we saw the 7 campfires again, and the same screams, the exact same screams. As we did the day before, checked out the area and found no signs of recent activity. It was just strange. None of us wanted to stay in the location another night, so we packed it up and moved a couple of miles away. A close group of 8 friends who were into the outdoors went hiking near the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. They followed no trail, instead relying on the paper map and compass to find their way. This high up and surrounded by mountains guaranteed no signal for the phones, so no GPS. The fourth night in, they had decided to set up camp near a creek they had been following. As we started a fire, Bobby went to the creek to get some cooking water to boil and found stepping stones leading to the opposite shore, which was roughly 20 feet away. The stones looked squared, but you could see where the water had been curving its edges over the years, giving them a slightly round look. About 6 inches deep and 15 inches across, the top was completely smooth. Someone had made these. 3 of the friends wanted to go and investigate to see what, if anything, was on the other side. Their main interest was in finding an abandoned home or something like it. It was 4 o'clock, a little late to be hiking, but they were insistent on going, promising to be back before dark. Sometime after 6 o'clock, the group sitting at the campsite started to get a little worried, for they hadn't heard from their friends. They started yelling their names, but got no answer. Even blew the whistles each wore around their neck in case someone got lost. No replying whistle could be heard. They continued this routine for 2 hours until it got completely dark. Now they were really worried. Each reminded themselves that their friends were experienced campers. They would know how to survive overnight. The next morning, with no sign of their missing friends, a rescue team was formed with 2 from the remaining group. They would cross over the creek and hopefully locate them. Maybe one was hurt, and the others didn't want to leave him behind. We just didn't know. We kept in contact, sending out a signal whistle every 5 minutes, and would get the answering whistle. This went on for the next 20 minutes, and then after that, nothing. An hour later, we still hadn't heard back from them. It was at this point we accepted the fact that something bad was happening. How do 5 friends just go missing? It was a really rough night. We were all paranoid with our imaginations running wild, waiting for the first light of dawn. Early the next morning, we agreed it was time to get help. But it could be a day or 2 before we could find it. We had to try something before leaving, so all 3 of us crossed a creek. It was a hill with trees growing everywhere, no trail to follow. We climbed it for about 15 minutes or so, and when we reached the top, the trees cleared to show as far as the eye could see green hilly fields and with what looked like tops of houses in the distance. We saw no people, no animals, not even birds flying overhead. It reminded me of a painting. It was that still, and it was dead quiet. Even the forest behind us had gone silent. We shouted our friends' names, and together blew our whistles loud enough to reach the moon, but got no responses. It just didn't make any sense. Where were they? And something was wrong with the way we sounded, even the whistling. It was a very odd, hard to describe feeling. A physical sensation, really, almost like your whole being is muffled, not just sound. All of us felt it. We debated about visiting what may be a homestead or small village, but none of us wanted to get any closer. Something was off, and I, for one, was going to listen to that little voice that said, "Run away from it." The others must have felt the same way because, as quickly as we could, climbed, or to be honest, ran back down a hill to the other side of the creek, grabbed our gear, and hightailed out of there to get our friends rescued. It took 2 days to find help, and another day for any action. The remaining group led the rescue team back to their campsite. They knew it was the right spot because of the markers left behind, but the stones leading to the other side of the creek were gone. No evidence they ever existed. It was frustrating for the three. It was the right spot. They were sure of it. One had a yellow shirt and used it as a marker. It was still wrapped around a small tree, and you can see the remains of our fire. Leading the team across the creek and up the hill, the friends were flabbergasted by what they saw. There were no endless green fields, no houses peeking up over a distant hill, just more trees. Everybody looked for days, but found none of the missing campers or any of their gear. The ranger in charge told us there were no homesteads or anything like a village on this part of the mountain, so we couldn't have seen what we saw. That statement made no sense. How could all three of us see the same thing? It just seemed so impossible. The case is still open, but the rescue teams believe their friends had gotten lost in the woods, were unable to find their way back, and died due to exposure. We didn't buy their explanation. Something happened to them, but we just don't know what. I personally believe it has something to do with those houses we saw. After all, our friends disappeared when they went to investigate it.